The alien ships came to Earth on a Tuesday morning. They were beautiful and terrible at the same time, hanging in the sky like silver moons. Every government on the planet panicked. Every military went on high alert. But the aliens didn't attack. They just watched and waited. After 3 days, they sent a message. It appeared on every screen, in every language all at once. The message was simple. Earth was being evaluated. Humanity would be tested to see if they were ready to join the Galactic Council. If they passed, they would receive advanced technology and protection. If they failed, they would be left alone for another 1,000 years. The tests began within a week. Alien examiners came down from the ships. They were strange creatures. Some looked like walking crystals that sparkled in the light. Others were clouds of glowing gas that somehow held a shape. A few looked almost human, but with too many eyes or fingers that bent the wrong way. They tested everything: mathematics, art, science, philosophy. They asked questions about war and peace, love and hate, life and death. Humanity tried its best to impress them. The smartest people from every country were brought forward to show what humans could do. Dae-hyun watched all of this on television from his small house in the Korean countryside. He was 17 years old, and none of it interested him very much. While the rest of the world stressed about the tests, he went about his normal day. He fed the chickens. He checked on the injured crow he was caring for. He walked through the forest and talked to the deer. Dae-hyun had always been different. While other children played with each other, he played with animals. While other students studied hard in school, he spent his time in the woods. His parents had worried about him. His teachers said he wasn't trying hard enough. Other kids called him weird and stayed away from him. But Dae-hyun didn't mind. He preferred animals to people anyway. Animals were honest. They didn't lie or pretend. A dog's wagging tail told you it was happy. A cat's flattened ears told you to back away. Birds sang when they were content and screamed when danger was near. It all made sense to him in a way that human behavior never did. One afternoon, an alien examiner came to his village. She was one of the crystal beings, tall and shining like a rainbow. She was testing people in the rural areas, looking for any hidden talents that might have been missed. When she found Dae-hyun sitting under a tree with the injured crow on his lap, she stopped. "What are you doing?" she asked. Her voice was strange, like music and wind chimes mixed together. "Talking to the crow," Dae-hyun said simply. He gently stroked the bird's feathers. The examiner's colors shifted. It took Dae-hyun a moment to realize she was laughing at him. "Humans cannot talk to animals. You lack the telepathic ability. That bird cannot understand you." "He understands me fine," Dae-hyun replied. He made a soft clicking sound with his tongue, and the crow tilted its head, looking at him with bright eyes. "His wing is almost healed. He'll be able to fly again soon." The examiner stepped closer, her crystalline body casting colored light across the ground. "I will test you now since I am here. Tell me, human, what is your greatest skill? What can you do that would be valuable to the Galactic Council?" Dae-hyun thought about it. He wasn't good at math like some people. He couldn't paint beautiful pictures or write poetry. He didn't understand science or computers, but there was one thing he could do better than anyone he knew. "I can understand animals," he said. "I know what they're feeling. I know what they need. I can help them, and they trust me." The examiner's colors shifted again, moving through shades that Dae-hyun couldn't quite read. "That is not a valuable skill. The galaxy has no need for people who speak to creatures that cannot speak back. True civilization requires communication between intelligent minds. Animals are not intelligent in any way that matters." "That's not true," Dae-hyun said, feeling a flash of anger. "Animals are smart. They just think differently than we do. A crow can solve puzzles. Wolves work together in teams. Dolphins have their own language. Just because they don't build spaceships doesn't mean they're not intelligent." The examiner's colors went cold and flat. "You prove my point, human child. You waste your empathy on creatures that can give nothing back to you. This is why your species will fail the evaluation. You are too emotional, too attached to lesser beings. The Council values logic and telepathic communion. Humanity has neither." She walked away without another word. The crow cawed softly, and Dae-hyun stroked its feathers again. "Don't listen to her," he whispered. "You're plenty smart." Over the next month, the evaluations continued. Dae-hyun heard the news reports. Humanity was not doing well. The aliens were unimpressed with human technology. They found human art confusing. They didn't understand human emotions. Most importantly, they were disappointed that humans had no telepathic abilities at all. Humans cannot even read each other's thoughts, one alien official announced. How can they possibly work alongside species that communicate mind to mind? They are too primitive, too isolated in their own skulls. The final evaluation results came on a cold winter morning. Earth had failed. Humanity was not ready to join the Galactic Council. The aliens would leave and not return for at least 1,000 years. Earth would remain quarantined, cut off from the rest of the galaxy, alone in the darkness of space. Most people were devastated. World leaders gave speeches about trying again in the future. Scientists talked about developing telepathic technology. Everyone had an opinion about what went wrong and how to fix it. Daehyun released the crow that day. Its wing had healed perfectly. He stood in the field behind his house and tossed the bird gently into the air. It caught itself, flapped hard, and soared up into the sky. It circled once, twice, 3 times, then flew off toward the mountains. "Good luck," Daehyun called after it. He didn't know that the crow would carry his message to the mountains. He didn't know that in the deep caves where sunlight never reached, something ancient was stirring. He didn't know that creatures older than human civilization had heard him speak, and after 10,000 years of sleep, they remembered. The dragons were waking up. And they remembered a promise they had made long ago, before humans had written language, before they had built cities, before they had forgotten how to speak the old language, the language that didn't use words, the language that didn't need telepathy, the language of understanding that flowed between different kinds of minds. The dragons remembered, and they were coming, because one human boy still spoke their language even if he didn't know it yet. And when the galaxy threatened his world, the dragons would answer his call. In his small house, Daehyun made dinner and fed his dogs. He didn't know that everything was about to change. He didn't know that the aliens had made a terrible mistake. They had looked at humanity and seen weakness. They had tested for telepathy and found none. They had dismissed Earth as primitive and worthless, but they had never thought to test the one thing that made humans special. The one gift that humans had kept alive while every telepathic species in the galaxy had lost it. The ability to understand minds completely different from their own. The ability to bond with creatures that thought in ways no telepath could imagine. The aliens had ridiculed the boy who spoke to beasts. Soon they would learn their mistake. Soon the dragons would rise, and the galaxy would never be the same. 1 year passed after the aliens left. Life on Earth tried to return to normal, but nothing was quite the same. Everyone knew now that humanity was alone in a crowded galaxy. They knew there were thousands of other species out there, living and working together, while Earth sat in isolation like a child sent to the corner. Some people got angry. They wanted to force the aliens to come back to demand another test. Others got scared. They built shelters and hoarded supplies, sure that the aliens would return to conquer, rather than evaluate. Most people just felt sad and went about their lives carrying a new weight of loneliness. Daehyun moved further into the countryside. He found an old cabin near the place where North and South Korea had once drawn their border. With both governments weakened by the failed contact event, nobody cared about the old boundaries anymore. The land was empty and wild, which suited him perfectly. He wasn't completely alone. A pack of wolves had made a den in the hills nearby. They didn't fear him like they feared other humans. Crows gathered in the trees around his cabin, bringing him shiny objects they found. A family of wild boars visited his garden every evening. Daehyun talked to all of them, not with words exactly, but with something deeper. Feelings, intentions, understanding. On the first day of winter, someone knocked on his door. Daehyun opened it to find a young woman standing there, wearing a heavy backpack and a determined expression. She was shivering in the cold. "Are you Daehyun?" she asked. "Yes, who are you?" "My name is Hana. I'm a scientist." "Well, I was a scientist before the government research programs fell apart. Can I come in? It's freezing out here." Daehyun led her inside and made tea. Hana sat at his small table, warming her hands on the cup. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept in days. "Why are you here?" Daehyun asked. "Because you're the only one who can help," Hana said. She pulled a tablet from her backpack and set it on the table. "The aliens are coming back. Not to evaluate us this time. To draft us." Daehyun sat down slowly. "Draft us? For what?" Hana tapped the tablet and it showed news reports from space. Not Earth news. These were transmissions that had been intercepted from alien sources. The images showed massive fleets of ships, battles in space, entire planets burning. "There's a war happening in another part of the galaxy," Hana explained. "Something called the Devourer Swarm is destroying everything in its path. The Council is losing badly. They need more soldiers, and they don't care where they get them." "So they're coming to Earth?" "In 6 months," Hana confirmed. "They're going to conscript 10 million humans, force them to fight in a war they don't understand against an enemy they've never seen, and because we're not telepathic, they think we're perfect for it. The enemy can't read our minds because we don't broadcast thoughts like other species." Daehyun felt cold despite the warm cabin. "We'd just be bodies to throw at the enemy." "Exactly," Hana leaned forward. "But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because of this." She turned the tablet toward him and played a video. It showed him from a year ago, sitting under a tree, talking to the injured crow. "Do you remember when the alien examiner tested you?" She laughed at me. She did. But one of the other aliens didn't. A junior scientist ran a deep scan while you were talking to the crow. She wanted to see if there was anything the examiner missed. Hana swiped through screens of data. "Look at these readings. These are electromagnetic frequencies. This is what was happening while you talked to that bird." The screen filled with waves of color, pulsing and flowing in complex patterns. Daehyun stared at them, not understanding. "You weren't just talking," Hana said softly. "You were broadcasting, on frequencies that the aliens barely register." "The crow wasn't understanding your words, Daehyun. It was reading your mind." Daehyun shook his head. "That's impossible. Humans aren't telepathic. Not the way the aliens are telepathic. They read each other's thoughts directly, mind to mind. But you're doing something different. Something older." Hana pulled up more data. "I've been researching this for months. Before humans developed language, before we built cities, we had to communicate somehow. We lived alongside animals. We hunted with wolves. We tamed horses. We kept dogs and cats and birds. How did we do that without language?" "Understanding," Daehyun said quietly. "You watch them. You learn what their movements mean. You feel what they feel." "Exactly. But it's more than just observation. It's a form of communication that doesn't need words or direct telepathy. It works through intent, emotion, body language, and apparently, electromagnetic fields that our brains naturally produce." Hana looked at him intently. "Most humans lost this ability when we developed complex language. We started talking to each other with words and we forgot how to communicate any other way. But you never lost it." Daehyun thought about all the years he had spent with animals. How natural it had always felt. How he just knew what they needed, what they felt, what they were thinking. He had always assumed he was just good at reading behavior. But maybe it was something more. "Why does this matter?" he asked. "Because if the Council thinks we're weak, they're wrong. They tested us for their kind of telepathy and found nothing. But they never tested for this. And if you can do it, maybe others can too." Hana stood up. "We need to find more people like you before the aliens return. We need to show them that humans aren't as primitive as they think." That night, Daehyun walked out into the winter forest. The wolves followed at a distance, curious about his mood. The crows watched from the trees. Everything was quiet except for the wind in the branches. Daehyun stopped in a clearing and closed his eyes. He thought about what Hana had said, about communication without words, about understanding across different kinds of minds. He thought about the aliens coming to take humans away to die in a war. He thought about Earth being alone and helpless, and then he did something he had never tried before. Instead of projecting his feelings to the animals around him, he pushed his thoughts outward as far as they would go. Not words, not even clear images, just a feeling, a need, a call for help. The forest went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then from deep in the mountains something answered. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a thought. It was a presence. Ancient, powerful, patient. Something that had been sleeping for longer than Daehyun could imagine. Something that remembered him, or at least remembered what he represented. The dragons were waking up, deep in caves that humans had forgotten existed, in crevices under mountains and underground lakes that had never seen sunlight. The dragons stirred from their long sleep. They had been waiting for this, waiting for the moment when humanity would need them, waiting for a human who still spoke the old language. Daehyun opened his eyes. His heart was pounding. The wolves were sitting around him in a circle, all of them staring toward the mountains. The crows had gone completely silent. Everything in the forest could feel it. Something was coming. Something old and powerful was answering the call. He walked back to the cabin where Hana was waiting. She looked up when he entered, and whatever she saw in his face made her stand up quickly. "What happened?" she asked. "Something answered," Daehyun said. "Something from the mountains. I think it's been waiting for someone to call." "What was it?" Daehyun didn't have a name for it, not yet. But deep in his bones, in some instinct older than language, he knew what it was. Every human child had heard the stories. Every culture had the legends. Creatures of incredible power that had once walked the earth alongside humanity, then vanished into myth and memory. "Dragons," he whispered. "The dragons are waking up." Hana stared at him. Then she laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. "Dragons aren't real. They're just myths. So were aliens," Daehyun pointed out. "Until last year." They sat in silence, drinking tea, while outside the cabin the world began to change. In the mountains, scales scraped against ancient stone. Massive eyes opened for the first time in 10,000 years. Wings unfurled in the darkness. And from 100 hidden places, the dragons began to move, drawn by the call of a human boy who spoke their language. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. And when the aliens returned to draft Earth's population into their war, they would find something waiting for them that no telepathic species had faced in 1,000,000 years. The age of dragons was returning. And this time they would not be alone. The alien warships returned to Earth on a gray morning 6 months later. There were more of them this time, and they didn't bother with gentle approaches or polite messages. They simply appeared in orbit, blocking out portions of the sky, and broadcast their demands in every language simultaneously. Earth would provide 10 million soldiers within 30 days. The soldiers would be given basic weapons and minimal training. They would fight the Devourer swarm until the war was won or they were dead. There would be no negotiation, no appeals, no exceptions. Any resistance would result in planetary occupation. Governments around the world scrambled to respond. Some prepared to comply, organizing lotteries and drafts to select who would be taken. Others attempted to mount defenses, knowing they would fail but unwilling to surrender without a fight. Most people simply panicked, flooding the streets in protest or hiding in their homes, hoping to be overlooked. Daehyun stood in the valley below his cabin and watched the first transport ship descend through the clouds. It was enormous, large enough to hold thousands of people. Its engines roared as it lowered itself toward the empty farmland, crushing crops beneath its weight. He was not alone. Beside him sat a creature that should not exist. She was smaller than the legends suggested, no larger than a horse, with scales that shifted color between gray and blue depending on how the light hit them. Her eyes were ancient and knowing, and when she looked at Daehyun, he felt her thoughts touch his mind like warm water. Her name was something that couldn't be spoken with a human mouth. It was a feeling, a frequency, a pattern in the electromagnetic spectrum. But Daehyun called her Isul, which meant morning dew in Korean because that's what her presence felt like in his mind. Fresh and clean and full of quiet power. Hana stood on his other side, tablet in hand, recording everything. Over the past 6 months, she had documented the awakening of dozens of dragons and their bonding with humans who had Daehyun's gift. Not many humans could do it. Maybe 1 in 10,000 had kept the ability to speak without words. But those who had it found the dragons waiting for them in the wild places of the world. The transport ship landed with a thunderous boom. A ramp extended and alien soldiers marched out. They were the crystal beings, the Velkrin, armored and armed with weapons designed to stun rather than kill. They needed the humans functional for war. The leader, an officer whose crystalline body shone with authority markings, approached Daehyun. His soldiers spread out in a formation, weapons ready. "You are selected for service," the officer announced. His voice was translated into Korean by his suit's speakers. "You will board the transport immediately for processing and deployment." Daehyun didn't move. "No," the officer's colors shifted to indicate confusion. "That is not an option. Resistance will result in forced compliance and punishment of your community." I said no. Daehyun kept his voice calm. Beside him, Isul rumbled deep in her chest, a sound too low for human ears, but one that made the ground vibrate. The officer noticed the dragon for the first time. His colors flickered through several shades rapidly: surprise, uncertainty, then anger. "What is that creature?" "Our sensors did not detect it." That's because your sensors are designed to find telepathic minds, Hana said, stepping forward. Dragons don't think like you do. They don't broadcast on the frequencies you monitor. The officer raised his weapon. It does not matter. Both of you will board now, or we will use force. He pulled the trigger. The weapon hummed and fired a stunning pulse directly at Daehyun's chest. But before the energy could reach him, Isul moved. She didn't attack or defend in any visible way. She simply existed differently for a moment. Her body generated an electromagnetic field so powerful and so alien to the Council's technology that every electronic system in the transport ship immediately went haywire. The stunning weapon sparked and died. The officer's armor froze, its servos locking in place. Inside the transport, lights flickered and went dark. Emergency systems failed to activate. The massive ship, so intimidating moments before, became nothing more than a dead metal box. The Velcrin soldiers tried to move, but their armor had become their prison. They stood frozen in place, unable to retreat or fight. And from the mountains behind Daehyun, more dragons emerged, 50 of them, each bonded to a human who had answered the call. They came in every size and color, products of 10,000 years of evolution in hidden places. Some were massive, with wings that could create storms. Others were sleek and quick, barely visible as they moved. A few seemed to flicker in and out of reality, their bodies not quite solid. Jihoon walked down from the hills, a former soldier whose hands had shaken from trauma until he touched his dragon. The creature beside him was scarred and black, making sounds too deep to hear, but that somehow calmed the noise in Jihoon's head. They moved together like two parts of one being. Minji came next, a young woman who had never spoken aloud in her life but whose thoughts sang clearly to her silver dragon. The dragon's mind moved in pure mathematics, patterns and numbers that Minji understood instinctively. Bora arrived with her water dragon, a creature that seemed to be made of liquid and mist. She had been a marine biologist before the world fell apart, and her dragon showed her what it was like to exist in multiple states at once. Taejin, an old man who had lost his family in the wars, walked slowly beside a gentle bronze dragon whose eyes held deep kindness. They didn't speak, but their peace was obvious. Each pair was unique. Each pair was perfect, and each dragon carried that same ability to disrupt the Council's technology simply by existing near it. Their electromagnetic signatures were incompatible with systems designed for telepathic species. In orbit above Earth, Admiral Torvin of the Velcrin fleet watched his monitors in growing horror. Every transport he sent down went dark. Every squad he deployed stopped responding, and his telepathic officers were reporting impossible readings from the planet's surface, energy signatures that matched no known species, life forms that shouldn't exist, and worst of all, the complete absence of fear from the humans below. "What are they?" he demanded. His science officer's colors showed pure confusion. "Unknown, Admiral. They register as biological, but their electromagnetic output is off all our scales. Our weapon systems cannot lock onto them. Our sensors cannot predict their movements. And they seem to be bonded somehow to the humans." "Bonded? What does that mean?" "I don't know, sir. We have no reference for this kind of relationship. It's not telepathic. It's not parasitic. It's something else entirely." Admiral Torvin made a decision. "Pull back all ground forces. Establish high orbit. We need to reassess this situation." On the ground, the Velcrin officer finally managed to reboot his armor's basic systems. He stared at Daehyun and the dragons surrounding him. His colors showed something the translator couldn't quite capture. Not fear exactly, but a complete reassessment of reality. "What are you?" he asked quietly. "We're humans," Daehyun said, "and these are our friends. You came to Earth thinking we were weak, thinking you could take us and use us and throw us away, but you never understood what makes us strong. Your weapons are nothing," the officer said, but his voice lacked confidence. "Our fleet could destroy your entire planet." "Maybe," Daehyun agreed. "But then you'd lose the war, because we're what you need, not soldiers, not cannon fodder, but teachers. You telepaths have forgotten how to work with minds different from your own. You've forgotten how to coordinate with species that don't share your mental frequencies. That's why you're losing to the swarm." The officer was silent for a long moment. His colors flickered through several shades. Finally, he asked, "How do you know about the swarm's nature?" "Because Hana hacked your communications 6 months ago," Daehyun said simply. "We know the swarm doesn't have a central mind. We know they're individuals that work together through instinct and chemical signals, not telepathy. We know your telepathic coordination falls apart when you face an enemy that can't be read. And you can defeat them? The officer's skepticism was clear in his colors. We can teach you how, Daehyun said. Humans have been working alongside non-telepathic species for thousands of years. We've built civilizations with animals that don't share our language, our thoughts, or our way of seeing the world. We know how to coordinate without reading minds. We know how to trust without understanding. And we can show you how to do the same. Isol lifted her head and sang. It wasn't a sound exactly, but a vibration that carried across multiple frequencies. The other dragons joined her, creating a chorus that made the air shimmer and the ground hum. It was beautiful and terrible and completely beyond the council's ability to comprehend. The Felkrin officer watched the dragons sing. His colors cycled through every shade his species could produce: wonder, fear, respect, understanding. We'll convey your message to the Admiral, he said finally, but I make no promises. The Council does not negotiate with primitives. Then the Council will lose, Daehyun said calmly, and Earth will remain here, protected by creatures you cannot detect, cannot predict, and cannot fight. Your choice. The officer and his frozen soldiers were eventually extracted by a recovery team. The dead transport was left behind as a message. And in orbit, Admiral Torvin faced the most important decision of his life. The negotiations took 2 weeks. The Galactic Council sent diplomats instead of soldiers, and they met with Daehyun and the other dragon-bonded humans in a neutral location. A massive ship was sent down to Earth's surface, modified to accommodate the dragons and their electromagnetic disruption fields. The lead diplomat was named Kirill, and he was neither Velkrin nor any species the humans had seen before. He was Nethrin, a being of living light that existed partially in several quantum states at once. When he spoke, his voice appeared directly in the minds of those listening. But it wasn't telepathy exactly, more like controlled vibration in the air itself. The Council acknowledges its error, Kirill began, his light form shifting between blue and purple. We evaluated Earth based on our own standards. We looked for telepathic ability and found none, so we assumed weakness. We were wrong. You were arrogant, Jihun said flatly. He sat with his black dragon beside him, both of them radiating a calm that came from having faced worse things than alien diplomats. You judged us by what we couldn't do instead of what we could. Kirill's light flickered in what might have been embarrassment. Yes, that is accurate. We would like to correct this mistake. Earth will not be conscripted. Instead, we offer an alliance. Join the Council as equals. Share your knowledge and your companions. In return, we offer technology, protection, and a place among the civilized species of the galaxy. What about the dragons? Minji asked. She didn't speak aloud but signed the words, which her silver dragon translated into electromagnetic pulses that Kirill's systems could read. You want to use them as weapons. We want to understand them, Kirill corrected. They are unlike any life form in Council records. They cannot be detected by our sensors. They disable our technology through passive emission. And they bond with humans in a way we have never observed. If we face the swarm without understanding these abilities, we will lose. The swarm adapts to everything we do. We need something they cannot adapt to. Hana, who had been quietly recording everything, spoke up. Show us the war. Show us what we're actually dealing with. Kirill didn't argue. His light form expanded and a hologram appeared in the center of the room. It showed space battles on a scale the humans couldn't quite process. Thousands of ships fighting against an enemy that looked like a dark cloud, but was actually trillions of individual creatures. Each creature was small, no bigger than a human hand with a chitinous shell and sharp mandibles. Alone, they were harmless. Together, they were devastating. The Devourer swarm, Kirill explained as the hologram played. We don't know where they came from. They appeared in the Andromeda sector 15 years ago and have been spreading ever since. They consume everything organic. They reproduce exponentially, and they adapt faster than any biological life should be able to. The hologram showed a council fleet executing a perfect coordinated attack, their movements synchronized through telepathic communication. For a moment, it looked like they were winning. Then the swarm changed. Within minutes, they had adapted to the council's tactics, flowing around the attack pattern like water. They have no central intelligence that we can detect. Kirill continued. Each individual creature is mindless, operating on instinct, but the collective displays problem-solving abilities that rival the smartest species in the galaxy. Our telepaths cannot read them because there is nothing to read. Our coordination becomes predictable because we all think alike. They learn our patterns and counter them. Dae-hyun watched the hologram carefully. He saw how the council ships moved in perfect unison, like a school of fish. It was beautiful and efficient, but also rigid, predictable. You fight like a hive mind, he said. We coordinate through telepathy, Kirill agreed. It is our greatest strength, and your greatest weakness, Dae-hyun replied. You're so connected that you all respond the same way to the same situation. The swarm doesn't need to predict individuals. It only needs to predict the group. Carol's light pulsed thoughtfully. What would you do differently? Dae-hyun looked at the other dragon-bonded humans in the room. 50 pairs, each completely unique. Ji-hun and his dragon moved with military precision. Minji and her dragon thought in mathematics and patterns. Bora and her water dragon flowed and adapted constantly. Taejin and his bronze dragon moved with patient wisdom. Every pair was different. Every pair had their own style, their own approach, their own way of solving problems. We wouldn't all move the same way, Dae-hyun said. We'd coordinate without conforming. Each pair would fight in their own style, adapted to their own strengths. The swarm couldn't predict us because we wouldn't be predictable. We'd be organized chaos. That sounds like a contradiction, Kirill observed. It's how wolves hunt, Dae-hyun explained. Each wolf is an individual with their own personality and skills. They don't read each other's thoughts. They read body language, sound, position, intent. They coordinate through observation and learn trust, not mental commands. It's messier than telepathy, but it's also flexible, adaptable, hard to predict from the outside. Isolde rumbled her agreement, and the sound made Kirill's hologram flicker. The dragon's electromagnetic field was interfering with the projection, but not in a hostile way. More like two different languages trying to share the same space. You want us to teach you to fight without telepathy, Hana said, understanding dawning. You want to learn how to coordinate like animals instead of like a hive mind. That is an oversimplification but essentially correct, Kirill admitted. Will you help us? Dae-hyun looked at the other humans. Ji-hun nodded slowly. Minji's hands moved in agreement. Bora smiled. Taejin closed his eyes and consulted silently with his dragon, then nodded as well. Around the room, one by one, the dragon-bonded pairs gave their consent. We'll help, Dae-hyun said, but not as your soldiers, as your teachers. And there are conditions. Earth remains sovereign. You share your technology freely, not as payment but as goodwill. You recognize that different doesn't mean inferior. And you never ever try to conscript anyone again. Kirill's light pulsed as he consulted with the distant council. The humans waited, knowing that what they were asking for was unprecedented. No primitive species had ever demanded equality with the council. No evaluated world had ever been given a second chance, much less a seat at the table. Finally, Kirill solidified into a more defined form. The council agrees to your terms. Earth will be recognized as a sovereign ally. We will share technology and knowledge freely. And we formally apologize for our initial evaluation. We failed to understand that intelligence comes in many forms and communication is more than just telepathy. Good, Dae-hyun said. He stood and Isolde rose with him, her scales catching the light. Then let's start training. You have a lot to learn, and from what I saw in that hologram, we don't have much time. Over the next 3 months, the dragon-bonded pairs spread throughout the council fleet. They went to different ships, different species, different military divisions. Everywhere they went, they taught the same lessons. How to communicate without reading minds, how to coordinate through observation instead of telepathy, how to trust allies who think differently than you do. Ji-hun worked with the Velkrin military units, teaching them to read body language across species barriers. His black dragon helped demonstrate how much information could be conveyed through posture, movement, and sound. Minji partnered with the Nethrin Science Division, showing them how mathematical patterns could coordinate action without mental commands. Her silver dragon thought in pure numbers, and the Nethrins found they could understand that language better than words. Bora taught the aquatic species about adaptation and flow. Her water dragon showed them how to change tactics on the fly, responding to situations without waiting for orders from a central command. Taejin worked with the older officers who were struggling to let go of telepathic coordination. His bronze dragon's patience helped them understand that slower doesn't mean weaker, and observation can be just as effective as mind reading. And Dae-hyun? He coordinated everything, moving between ships and species, helping everyone understand the core principle. You don't need to think alike to work together. You just need to understand each other. Not through telepathy, not through language, but through the oldest form of communication in the universe: watching, listening, learning, trusting. The council species struggled at first. Thousands of years of telepathic coordination had made them mentally lazy in certain ways. They had forgotten how to observe because they didn't need to. They had forgotten how to predict because they could just read intentions directly. But slowly, gradually, they started to learn. And as they learned, something changed in the council fleet. The rigid perfection of their movements softened. The predictable patterns became more varied. Individual ships started making independent decisions while still supporting the overall strategy. They started to fight less like a single organism and more like a pack. And when the time came to face the swarm again, they would be ready, not as a telepathic hive mind that the enemy could predict and counter, but as something new, something the galaxy had never seen, a coalition of individuals who thought differently, fought differently, and trusted each other not because they shared thoughts. The council fleet assembled at the edge of the Andromeda sector 3 months after training began. 1,000 ships representing 40 different species, all of them carrying the new tactics they had learned from the humans and dragons. It was the largest military force the council had gathered in centuries. Admiral Torvin stood on the bridge of his flagship with Dae-Hyun beside him. The Velcrin officer had changed over the past months. His colors were more varied now, shifting through shades that indicated he was paying attention to more than just telepathic signals. He had learned to watch, to observe, to read situations without reaching for mental contact first. "The swarm will be here soon," Torvin said. "Our scouts detected them moving toward this system. They cannot resist a fleet this size. Are your people ready?" Dae-Hyun asked. "We trained as you instructed, but I will not lie. It feels wrong to fight without full telepathic coordination." "It feels chaotic. It is chaotic," Dae-Hyun agreed. He sat on the floor next to Is-Sol, one hand on her scales. Through their bond, he could feel her calm confidence. But chaos is harder to predict than order. That's the point. 3 hours later, the Devourer swarm arrived. They came as a dark cloud that blotted out the stars. Trillions of individual creatures moving together in patterns that looked random, but were actually deeply coordinated. The council's sensors showed the massive chitin and hunger spreading across space like a living storm. "All ships engage," Torvin commanded through the fleet-wide communications system. Not telepathically this time. Out loud, giving each ship time to interpret the order in their own way. The council fleet moved forward, but not in the perfect synchronized formation they had always used. Instead, they moved in clusters. Groups of ships with compatible fighting styles working together, but each group doing things differently. The Velcrin ships used direct assault tactics. The Netheran vessels phased in and out of normal space. The aquatic species ships flowed around obstacles like water. Each species fought according to their nature, coordinated by observation and communication rather than shared thoughts. The swarm hit them like a wave. Millions of creatures swarmed over the ships, trying to eat through hulls, clog engines, overwhelm defenses. The council fleet began to take damage. Ships reported breaches and casualties. It looked like the swarm was winning again. Then the dragons joined the battle. 72 of them launched from specially modified carriers, each one carrying their bonded human in a protective harness. They were small compared to the capital ships, tiny specks against the vastness of space, but their presence changed everything. The dragons didn't fight like any ship or weapon the swarm had encountered. They moved in 3 dimensions with impossible grace, their bodies somehow able to survive in vacuum. They generated electromagnetic fields that disrupted the swarm's chemical communication, making it harder for the creatures to coordinate. And most importantly, they fought as individuals, not as a group mind. Is-Sol spiraled through a cloud of swarm creatures, her scales generating pulses that confused their navigation. Dae-Hyun hung on, his mind linked with hers, feeding her information about the battle around them. Not through telepathy, through their unique bond, the ancient language of human and beast working as one. Jihoon's black dragon roared in subsonic frequencies that made the swarm creatures freeze momentarily. It wasn't much, just a second or two, but it was enough for nearby ships to target them effectively. Minji's silver dragon moved in mathematical patterns, creating formations that other ships could follow without needing orders. She thought in pure numbers, and the patterns she created were instinctively recognizable even to species that didn't understand them consciously. Bora's water dragon phased between solid and vapor, moving through the swarm like mist, impossible to catch or predict. She disrupted their formations simply by existing in ways they couldn't comprehend. Taejin's bronze dragon moved slowly and deliberately, creating zones of calm in the chaos where damaged ships could retreat and regroup. His patience became a defensive strength. The battle raged for 8 hours. It was messy and chaotic and nothing like the elegant coordinated attacks the Council had always used. Ships sometimes got in each other's way. Groups occasionally misread each other's intentions. There were mistakes and confusion and moments of pure disorder, but the swarm couldn't adapt to it. They were built to counter patterns, to predict coordinated movements, to overwhelm unified tactics. They had learned to defeat the Council's telepathic precision, but faced with a fleet where every unit fought differently, where coordination came through 1,000 different channels instead of one mental network, they didn't know what to do. Individual swarm creatures tried to learn and adapt, but by the time they figured out one ship's pattern, that ship had moved on, and another had taken its place with a completely different approach. It was like trying to predict a murmuration of starlings where every bird was a different species, with different instincts. Slowly, gradually, the Council fleet began to push the swarm back. Not through overwhelming force, but through unpredictability, the swarm creatures began to retreat, pulling back from the battle in confused disarray. For the first time in 3 years of warfare, they were withdrawing not because they had consumed everything, but because they couldn't figure out how to win. Admiral Torvin watched from his bridge as the swarm disappeared into the darkness of space. His colors cycled through shades the humans had learned meant joy, relief, and wonder. "We won," he said, and his voice carried disbelief. "For the first time since this war began, we actually won." Daehyun landed back on the flagship with Isol, both of them exhausted but unharmed. Around them, other dragon-bonded pairs returned to their ships. They had taken casualties. 3 dragons had been killed, and 5 humans had died when their ships were breached. The victory wasn't clean or easy or perfect, but it was a victory. And more importantly, it was a lesson. The Council species had learned that their way wasn't the only way. That coordination didn't require telepathy. That different minds working together could be stronger than identical minds moving as one. Over the following months, the war began to turn. The Council didn't win every battle, but they stopped losing all of them. They learned to fight like a pack instead of a hive mind. They learned to value diversity of thought instead of unity of purpose. And slowly, painfully, they began to push the swarm back. The dragon-bonded humans became the most valued members of the fleet, but they weren't treated as weapons or tools. They were teachers, coordinators, bridges between species that had never learned to communicate without telepathy. 2 years after that first battle, Daehyun stood on a reclaimed planet watching Velkrin children approach an Earth dog for the first time. The dog had been trained by Jihyun specifically for this purpose. It sat patiently while the young crystalline beings tried to understand its body language without reading its mind. "Your species has changed us," Kirill said, appearing beside Daehyun in his light form. "The Council debates granting Earth a permanent seat in the High Chamber. No species so young has ever been offered this honor." "We don't need honors," Daehyun replied. He watched the children's colors shift with delight as the dog wagged its tail in response to their careful approach. "We just wanted you to understand that different doesn't mean lesser. Telepathy is powerful, but it's not the only way to connect." "We understand that now," Kirill agreed. "Though I confess many of us are still learning. It is difficult to unlearn thousands of years of habit." Isol rumbled softly beside Daehyun, and he felt her amusement through their bond. The dragons found the whole situation funny in a way. They had slept for 10,000 years waiting for humans to be ready, and humans had spent those 10,000 years learning to communicate with creatures that couldn't read their thoughts. Also, they could eventually teach telepathic aliens the value of not reading minds. "What will you do now?" Kirill asked. "The war is not over, but we can manage without your constant guidance. You and the other bonded pairs have done more than enough." Daehyun thought about it. He thought about Earth, about the mountains and forests, about the cabin where all of this had started. But he also thought about the galaxy, about all the species still learning to work together, about the countless worlds that might need help. "We'll keep teaching," he decided. "There are more dragons waking up on Earth every day. More humans discovering they have the gift. And the galaxy is big. Lots of species probably need to learn what you learned. That communication is more than telepathy. That understanding is more than reading thoughts. Daehyun corrected gently. The council spent so long perfecting mental communication that you forgot all the other ways minds can connect. Through trust. Through observation. Through working alongside beings completely different from yourself. That's what humans have always been good at. We've spent our entire existence learning to understand creatures that don't think like us. Kirill's light pulsed with what the humans had learned was satisfaction. The ridiculed boy who spoke to beasts, he said. That's what the first evaluation report called you. Did you know that? I didn't, but it sounds about right. The council was wrong to ridicule you. You possessed exactly what we needed, what the galaxy needed.